A lot of women from around the world were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. About 80 to 200,000 women were estimated to be used as sex slaves. And most of the victims were from Korea, as Korea was a Japanese colony at that time. The Japanese wartime sexual slavery has started to rise as a critical social issue since the beginning of the 1990s. Sex slave victims in Korea have called for an official apology and compensation from the Japanese government. Victims of the wartime sexual slavery have told their stories of being forced to serve as sex slaves. And this issue has remained unsolved for the past several decades as one of the major conflicts between Korea and Japan. On December 28, Korea and Japanese governments announced that the two countries have reached an agreement on the Japanese wartime sexual slavery issue. There have been positive views on the recent deal, which was achieved after going through several director-level as well as vice-ministerial-level talks. However, at the same time, some people have raised concerns over the announcement, which said that the issue would be finally and irreversibly resolved, without mentioning the legal responsibility of the Japanese government. On the New Year's address, President Park Geun-hye emphasized that as only a few of the victims have remained alive, the government has galvanized all efforts to take a prompt action on the issue. President Park added that the agreement includes the involvement of the Japanese military in the sexual slavery, official apology from the Japanese government, and reparations to the victims. The bilateral agreement between Korea and Japan on the Japanese wartime sexual slavery has also drawn a lot of attention from the international community. And other countries have also raised their voices to the Japanese government, demanding compensation for the victims. Upfront takes a deeper look at the major controversies over the deal between Korea and Japan, and also discusses the expected impact of it in the near future.
Wartime sex slavery, it is an issue that has divided Japan and Korea for nearly quarter century, we have to say. And a few weeks ago, at the end of December, Japan and Korea have reached an agreement finally to settle the differences. What's in the agreement and what does it mean for the future? We'll talk about them today in this program, Upfront. And for this important issue, we have important guests here. First of all, Professor Park Tae-woo, research professor at Institute of Sustainable Development of Korea University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Professor Chang-hee, professor of political science from Inha University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And Professor Ki-jeong of Institute for Japanese Studies at Seoul National University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's start with one of the perhaps the toughest question we might have to deal with today. That is explaining the differences between Japan's position and Korea's position about this issue. How should we tackle it? Professor Park is always good at this tackling difficult ones, so let's
That's right.
go for it.
Since we have established diplomatic relations starting the year 1965 by the name of Basic Treaty, Japanese government have argued that all the issues regarding the Japanese occupation of colonial rule in Korea at the time have been settled peacefully, completely. So they are not recognizing the individual claims regarding sexual slavery, conscripted workers, atomic bomb victims, and so on. It's not legally responsible in case of a Japanese government, responsibility, something like this. But international community and our government, especially since the year 2011, when our constitutional court ruled that individuals' right to claim their sacrifices during the Japanese colonial occupation must be sought by the South Korean government. So we have to seek solutions. This is our duty. This is our constitutional spirit.
Okay.
Also, in the following year, 2012, our Supreme Court also again ruled that our government must, solve this kind of issues diplomatically with more effort, something like that. So
Right.
regarding the two different positions, our government and Japanese government have been talking about this issue all the years since the time on.
Then
Right.
I think what you have told us so far is a good summary of Korean position here. Professor Nam, what do you think about the Japanese side? I mean, he has mentioned, Professor Park has mentioned, not recognizing the what happened and denying the legal responsibility. But I think there are a little bit more subtlety there, right? What has been Japanese side? It's difficult.
Yes. Well, Professor Park, I think, has nicely summarized what have happened so far and how and why sometimes the positions have been different between Korea and Japan. Maybe the reason why we are today is because the fact that Prime Minister Abe retreated from his controversial remark when he was elected as the president of Liberal Democratic Party in 2012.
Okay.
Before he took office as prime minister,
Right.
he suddenly, all of a sudden, he said that there's no universal definition of war. And then he also implied that he doesn't believe that there was so-called comfort women or sex slaves. This was really alarming thing to not only Korea but all
So he was
Asians.
getting close to the point where he was sort of like denying what might have happened.
Yeah,
So
we
that
call
really
it as a
angered Korea's side.
neo-revisionist outlook at the past.
So, Professor Nam Ki-jeong, this is very different stance that they began taking since 2012, 2011, and that has really angered the Korean side. Is that how we should describe the situation?
Yes, as Professor Park and Professor Nam pointed out, the main reason why this issue could not be resolved so far is that Korea and Japan conflicted over Japanese government's legal responsibility. But by the end of the Noda administration, Japanese side implied that it can acknowledge its responsibility without the objective.
It cannot acknowledge without the objective.
Yeah,
okay.
without the objective moral. Yes.
Okay.
At-
Noda administration, when did it end? What time are we talking about? You said by the end of Noda administration, things have changed.
in the year of 2012.
Okay,
Yes.
so we're talking about the same
Yes,
time.
yes.
Okay.
And if we look into detail, the articles of the Basic Treaty of 1965
Right.
between Japan and Korea, especially Article 3, there is a very important, the content there, something like this, that for future negotiations,
Right.
Any dispute concerning the interpretation or the implementation of this agreement shall be settled primarily through diplomatic channels. So it left many rooms
I
for more
see.
talks, indeed,
I see.
like this kind of individual claims
Right.
during the colonial period.
So that was one of the mechanisms that has made this kind of dispute possible, I guess. Okay, we can talk about the differences a little bit further later on in our discussion, but now let's move on to the next point that a lot of people may wonder about. That is the current Korean government's position, especially Park Tae-woo administration. Many people seem to believe that this administration has taken a position that seems to be the toughest of the whole time, ever since this sex slavery issue came out at 1991. That's what I remember. But for the past about 24 years, this administration takes the toughest stance. Why is that? First of all, is the observation correct? And why is that? Professor Nam Chang-hee, what's your observation?
Yeah, as Professor Park mentioned, after the Supreme Court ordered the government, South Korean government, to do something in order to resolve this issue, the Park Geun-hye administration, had to something, and on top of that, she had her own agenda regarding this issue. She really wanted to resolve this once and for all during her term.
I see.
So because of that, she was very much eager to push Japan to come to the acceptable terms. And she even went further, saying that without resolving the issue once and for all, she wouldn't have a bilateral summit.
Right.
So the issue has become very hot and the central diplomatic issue between the two countries.
Does that mean during the Lee Myung-bak administration, the court ruling, the judiciary branch of the government really made a difference? Was Lee Myung-bak administration seeking more reconciliatory approach before the court ruling, and then did court ruling change everything, all the landscape? What do you remember?
It is true that after Constitutional Court and Supreme Court ruling, our government attitude has been changed into a more positive and more aggressive directions, seeking more solutions. And I think, after Park Geun-hye administration was inaugurated in the year 2012,
Right.
actually, as of now, almost 3 years has passed. About 6 times summit talks between Xi Jinping and Park Geun-hye with China, but
Sure.
only 1 time with Prime Minister Abe there.
Right.
It means that our government has shown strong willingness. We have to solve this issue. Otherwise, no summit. I don't want any formal summit with you.
Right.
You have to solve this issue first, because this is a very, very sensitive issue that South Korean people think that I must serve as the president of Republic of Korea, something like that. So it has been delayed, but this time, I think, time has passed 3 years. This is enough.
Right.
No more time. We have to
Right.
think about our national interest.
That's a good summary of what's been happening on the surface. But underneath the surface, Professor Nam Ki-jeong, we remember there have been about 12 rounds of Director General level of talks. So looks like on the surface there have been heated political debate and tension and all that, but underneath there have been some efforts. What is your observation for the last 12 rounds of Director General's talk? Have we seen much progress leading up to this December, or was December's agreement just like a sudden turnaround or a sudden development of an issue?
Well, in addition to the Director General level negotiations, several important figures of Korea and Japan, such as National Security Council head Shotaro Yachi
I see.
and Byung-gi Lee, Chief of Staff for President Park,
And former ambassador to Japan.
yes,
Right.
have contacted with each other and led behind-the-scene talks. And I heard that Yachi made a 2-day visit to Seoul on December 22nd and 23rd and held talks with Lee, making a breakthrough for the deal. Yachi is one of Prime Minister Abe's most trusted aides and security advisor,
I see.
and a former top Korea diplomat who served as Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, because he values very much the relationship with Korea,
Right.
as well as the ties with the U.S. He has played an important role as a balancer against the historical revisionists around Abe.
So this high-level talk, who are the close confidant of Abe and also President Park, that might have made all the difference, I suppose,
yes,
towards
yes.
the end point. Okay, then let's get to another very tough question of the day. This name of this program is Upfront, so we address it upfront. How do we evaluate the December agreement, Professor Nam?
Well, I heard that the public opinion with respect to this agreement is sharply divided.
Are we talking about both Korea and Japan?
In Korea.
Okay, in Korea.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
There are many people who say that, well, enough is enough. And as Professor Park mentioned, we got to first think about our national security.
Right.
And the other people say that it fell too much. It fell short of our expectations. So I'd like to put it this way: at the national security level, we are professors. We are good at grading students,
Right.
and we always grade papers.
All right. Let's grade them.
At the national security level, I think I can grade A-.
A minus.
A-, but
Not bad.
but human security level,
Human security.
yeah,
Okay.
at individual level, I would rather give C+.
C plus.
So we
Very
have
strong.
two different level of analysis.
Right. But we need subjective observation of the experts here, and so Professor Park, I'm waiting for your words.
Yes.
Your personal observation.
That's right. I agree with Professor Nam's evaluation on this. But what I have observed after the rounding up of the talks between the two countries is that many people think that it is a pity that Japanese government have not accepted legal responsibility. Rather, they accepted moral responsibility, even though Japanese government donate about 1 billion yen, something like this.
Okay.
But if we look back into the history, in the year 1993, Kono's statement, also the following 2 years, 1995, Urayama's statement. At the time, they also expressed that remorse and deep apologies, something like that. But this time, we expected, legal responsibility of the Japanese government for their atrocities committed to sexual slavery with women and also all the victims during the colonial period. So I think this is an incomplete result, but in a larger context, thinking about Northeast Asian security situation, especially a tension-ridden situation in this region, confronting North Korea, I think, time is late for conclusion.
Yeah. You raised an important question about whether Japanese government accepted legal responsibility or not. And I think we need to talk about in depth sometime in the middle of our discussion later on, after covering some of the issues here. But Professor Nam Ki-jeong, we are curious about the reaction inside Japan about the agreement. Professor Nam, what do you see in terms of Japan's reaction?
According to the opinion polls that conducted in Japan after the deal, positive response was outweighed the negative one.
Okay.
Yeah, Yomiuri's opinion poll showed that 49% of positive and 36% of negative assessment. And another opinion poll issued by NHK at almost same time revealed that 64% of positive and 28% of negative opinion. I don't know in detail about the reasons why the respondents are for or against the agreement. But based on the newspaper's report articles, I guess those who have negative opinion think that basically Japanese government does not have to apologize at all, and so they oppose to the agreement. Or that it is still unclear whether Korean government relocate the comfort women statue soon. Therefore, it can be said
that stands right in front of Japanese embassy in Seoul.
Yes, yes. Therefore, it can be said that ironically, they are taking a completely opposite stand of Korean people who are against the deal.
Interesting. For a brief clarification, Professor Nam Chang-hee, we were talking about Korean public opinion kind of evenly divided, right? According to different polls, right? Okay, good. Now, to talk about all these related issues, let's take a look at the video that will show us the announcement of the agreement when it happened at the end of December. And we'll take a look at it and then we'll come back to our discussion. Let's take a look.
1、慰安婦問題は当時の軍の関与のもとに多数の女性の名誉と尊厳を深く傷つけた問題であり、かかる観点から日本政府は責任を痛感しています。2、日本政府はこれまでも本問題に真摯に取り組んできたところ、その経験に立って今般日本政府の予算によりすべての元慰安婦の方々の心の傷を癒す措置を講じます。
1. 한국 정부는 일본 정부의 표명과 이번 발표에 이르기까지의 조치를 평가하고 일본 정부가 앞서 표명한 조치를 착실히 실시한다는 것을 전제로 이번 발표를 통해 일본 정부와 함께 이 문제가 최종적 및 불가역적으로 해결될 것임을 확인한다. 아울러 한일 양국 간 가장 어렵고 힘든 과거사 현안이었던 일본군 위안부 피해자 문제 협상이 마무리되는 것을 계기로 새해에는 한일 양국이 새로운 마음으로 새로운 한일 관계를 열어나갈 수 있게 되기를 중심으로 기원합니다. 감사합니다.
So that was how the announcement was made December 28, and we still have a lot to talk about the announcement itself. First of all, question of the legality, how, not legality, but how legally binding this agreement is. Some people say it was just an announcement, it was not a treaty. But other people say it's an international agreement between the two governments. There are different views about it. And more than anyone, I suppose, Professor Park, you're familiar with the overall process of dealing with this kind of agreement at the National Assembly and making them binding and all that. What's the nature of this agreement? What I remember is, and as our viewers have seen, Japanese foreign minister spoke, and then Korean foreign minister spoke, and what they read remains as so-called agreement, right? So how binding is this?
I think it is binding between the two governments, but not as the level of treaties, ratified by the National Assembly.
I see.
It means that it was in a verbal agreement, not such an treaty-oriented, document that must be ratified by the National Assembly or Diet of Japan. Like that. However, two government officials, especially Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is in charge of diplomatic protocols, they agreed, and it is binding. We have to keep all the promises, word agreed there.
I'm curious about this agreement as compared to 1965 agreement. Are they 65 agreement and then the 2015 agreement? Are they basically the same in terms of format and then legal bindingness, if you will, or are they different?
You mean the basic agreement of 1965?
Right. Well, for example, our viewers may wonder whether 1965 was a treaty that passed National Assembly, ratification and all that. Did that happen, or are they the same kind of agreement?
The two are totally different.
How?
As he mentioned, this is a kind of gentleman's agreement.
This one, 2015, okay.
2015 one. And I think even though this agreement is not legally binding, it is binding to the international public opinion, the whole international community.
Okay.
So if any of the two parties, does not live up to this agreement, the country should face, criticism from the international community.
Okay.
So in that regard, it has some effectiveness. But the structure is a whole different one, and the one important thing is that the Japanese government does not want to, change any clause of 1965 agreement. And as he mentioned, there's some room for negotiation. So the level of the legality is different, and even the structure is different.
Very interesting. Professor Nam Ki-jeong, inside Japan, we heard reports that some of the critics of this agreement saying it's just an agreement and it's not really a treaty, and so therefore it's not really binding, and it's not that strongly enforceable, and there's no strong obligation attached to it. What did they mean? Did they mean that Japan should not do all these things to abide by the agreement, or were they saying Korea is not going to do things because this is weak? I'm confused. What were they saying when they're saying this is a weak agreement?
I think as the most appropriate precedent for the deal, we can take the agreement between Dongkwon Lee and COC Saito, reached in November 2012, into consideration. This agreement made by then Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary Saito and Lee, special envoys respectively dispatched by then Prime Minister Noda Yoshihiko and then President Myung-bak Lee.
Right.
However, this agreement ended up with being nullified when Noda dissolved the Japanese Diet because it was reached without Noda's approval. From my perspective, if Noda approved the Lee-Saito agreement, comfort women issue would be solved at that time. But the last December's agreement was made by two foreign ministers more important and responsible officials than special envoys.
Right.
And top leaders of the executive branches of the two governments, the president and the prime minister, approved the deal through the hotline. The direct communication established the base of the agreement because President Park actually accepted Abe's apology.
Another technical issue for me in my mind is this time, according to the agreement, a new foundation will be set up by the Korean government, and the Japanese government, as you mentioned, Professor Park, will contribute about 1 billion yen. That's in dollar terms about $8.3 million, and they'll contribute it to help former sex slaves. And a lot of people wonder, those people who remember the previous similar kind of foundation, what was called the Foundation for Peace in Asia for Women, which is not working anymore since 2007.
Yes.
How is this different in terms of its nature, two different funds? How are they different?
Well, there's just one step forward this time.
Okay.
And the previous arrangement, it was not officially Japanese government money,
I see.
which was given to the victims. But this is explicitly Japanese
Government budget.
money,
Okay,
budget. So
okay.
that implies that indirectly, Japanese government admitted that their state responsibility
I see.
in this, crime against the women during the wartime. So in that regard, there was a small, step forward. So about which, the South Korean Foreign Ministry is boasting about.
I see. So, yes.
Japanese government, moved closer to our expectations. In the year 1995, when they founded the foundation, Asia Women's Fund, something like that,
Right.
but they collected those funds through private organizations, indirectly, probably negotiated by the government, Japan inside themselves. But this time, anyway, Japanese government, donation directly
Right.
into future management of this kind of a women issue is it has a implication that, well, morally you are responsible, even though you are not accepting legal responsibility this time. So I think more improved approaches this
De
time.
facto recognition that state was involved and the Japanese state was responsible.
In addition, in terms of the amount of the fund, Japan seems to have made a huge compromise because the amount initially negotiated was 1 or 200 million yen.
Big difference.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
With 200 million yen, the surviving victims can be supported to the level of the measures taken by the Asian Women's Fund.
And one very important thing is that for South Korean government, the amount itself is not an issue here.
Of course.
What is important is that it got to be Japanese government money,
Right.
budget.
Right.
Yes.
South Korea is, this country is rich enough to,
course.
collect maybe 10 or 100 more times
Right.
money than 1 billion yen if we want to. So the amount of money is not an issue here. So there are some people out there that it is too small, but I think that is not the correct assessment of
Right.
this issue.
Professor Park, I need to ask you a very tough question here. You said in this agreement, Japanese government seemed to avoid the legal responsibility. But in the statement itself, what it says is Japan fully realizes its responsibility, mentioning Japanese government money being spent on this fund. And so doesn't that mean they accept legal responsibility, as Professor Nam has implied? What's your foundation to say they did not?
Not that clear. They are expressing their legal responsibility in an indirect way. We want expression of direct way expressions, not indirect expressions.
What are they trying to avoid by using this indirect way of
They are still
expressing?
sticking to the basic formula of Basic Treaty 1965. They still argue that all the issues regarding Japanese colonial occupation has been solved permanently, legally. So
but-
they are still sticking to the position, but
Okay.
they are moving into our expectation a little more. Why? Because this kind of Article 3 basic treaty leaves much rooms for individuals' approaches for
see.
claims, atrocities committed by Japanese
Right.
Imperial Army at the time.
Okay. Okay, then let me ask you another question. We're just trying to keep a balance in this program because, there's a Korean position and Japanese position. Even though this is a Korean program, we are trying to push as much as we can towards the center balance here. In the agreement, Professor Park,
Yes.
Abe, the Prime Minister Abe, as the head of the government, recognizes the suffering of the people and then offers sincere apology. So that's not government.
There's
Accepting.
moral approaches still.
I see,
There's
I see.
still moral approaches, I think. Politicians, especially head of Japanese cabinet, could say this kind of wordings everywhere, not only to South Korean victims, to those the Syrian refugees who are suffering from moving around here without their homes. This is a general approach. I think if he want to accept their legal responsibility, the wording must be more clear and it must be made in the form of treaties, I think, ratified by the government. Then it is 100%. It's legal responsibility admitted by Japanese government, I think.
Right. Well, let's move on to another very interesting issue. That is in the agreement that there is expression finally and irreversibly. I suppose each side interpret that expression differently. Isn't there a possibility? What does it mean?
This is a double-faced phrase. I think using the word irreversibly implies that mutual distrust between the two countries was extremely prominent.
Okay.
From the Japanese side's perspective, Korea is not a trustful partner because it frequently switches the level of requirements, just like moving a goalpost during a soccer match.
From their perspective, there is a 1965 agreement, and then Korean government has been pushing the goal further back.
Yes,
That's what Japanese are
yes,
thinking,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Okay.
In contrast, Korean governments doubt the sincerity of the Japanese side, since when Japanese side made efforts to express its remorse, such as issuing Kono statement and Brahma statement, cabinet members and politicians repeatedly made reckless remarks or behavior,
Right.
like they did not agree with those statements. So the word irreversibly should be interpreted that both sides must not reverse the agreement, because this deal will be considered as final resolution related to the comfort women issue.
Right. We want to share with you a on-site report about this protest that has been going on in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul for the past 24 years. Let's take a look at it and we'll come back to our discussion once again. As we have just been reminded by this report, in Korea we have victims who are politically active here. And after the December 28th agreement, they have raised their voice saying that during the negotiation and talks, they were not consulted enough. And so that is a very strong argument on the side of criticism about this agreement. And Korean government says, we are trying to talk to them and communicate with them after the agreement to share the understanding here. So how fair is this criticism here? Okay. Is such consultation possible when the two governments are talking about very politically contentious issues? Professor Nam Chang-hee, what's your viewpoint, perspective here?
I know that there are some people criticizing that the MOFA chief, I mean the
Minister of Foreign Affairs,
Secretary Minister Yoon, and chief negotiator Sang-duk Lee were unfortunately more attentive to guidance dictated by the Blue House rather than listening to the voices of the real victims.
Right.
But in overall assessment, I think, the MOFA probably did their best.
Professor Nam Ki-jeong, what's after this agreement now? Some people say maybe we should do something about the victims of forced labor and even the victims of the nuclear bombing. What do you see ahead after this agreement? Is this the done deal, end of everything, or will there be something more coming?
Okay, regarding the issue of forced labors, several lawsuits are ongoing. But I would like to note that the latest agreement on comfort women issue has no binding force on other issues. And for atomic bomb survivors, the authorities are already implementing measures to help them. After exposed to radiation, around 20,000 survivors are estimated to come back to Korea.
Okay.
Since 2003, Japanese government expanded the range of beneficiaries of the atomic bomb survivors certificate. And about 3,000 of survivors in Korea are getting various supports with the certificate. While there remains difficulties, if they can prove they are the victims, several supportive programs are already prepared and implemented.
So nuclear attack survivors, they're being offered certain coverage here, and then lawsuit is going on the victims of forced labor. So, and you're saying, let's not link them together because this agreement is about sex slaves and then does not have bearing on other issues. I think that was very clear point to keep in mind. What's ahead now in terms of Japan-Korea relations? It's kind of warm summit between the two heads of the government. Are we going to see something very different as perhaps the United States wants to see? What's your expectation? Be a fortune teller for us.
That's right. After finishing this kind of difficult negotiations, both countries have urgent security tasks to be pushing together, I think. The first one is that we have to conclude the military intelligence exchange agreement, something like that. After the fourth nuclear test in North Korea, the situation in Northeast Asia has changed dramatically into a tension-ridden one, especially China's, I think, very negative approach to our expectations, too more pressure on North Korea. This is not working. So we expected too much from Beijing's stance to help us in case of North Korean nuclear issue, something like that. So Japan and Washington could be our key allies to make schemes to put pressure to end, to dismantle North Korean nuclear issues this time. So security issue has emerged, such a very important, more than economic issues. This is a matter of survival for our past and future generations.
Professor Nam Chang-hee, I think Professor Park mentioned a very important point. Now, the importance of security cooperation, the trilateral cooperation, Korea, Japan, and the United States. But what we remember is, he also mentioned as well, the military information sharing agreement that Lee-myung-bak government pushed forward. It sank. It failed, right? Do you see the current environment being very different from the environment at that time? Do we see enough of support inside Korean public, among the Korean public, for this kind of security cooperation with Japan?
Yes. I mean, for example, in Japan, there will be more Japanese people who would support more security cooperation with us, South Korea.
That has been always there, pretty much. But in Korea,
in South Korea,
yeah, what do we see?
Well, regardless of the fact that we came to an agreement over the issue, I think South Koreans are wise enough that we have to, do something with respect to North Korean nuclear development, and in order to effectively deal with that issue, the wise South Koreans believe that Japan is a key partner, and I think North Korea detonated so-called hydrogen bomb this time.
Right.
But what we need to notice this time is that we lost the information war with North Korea. Nobody knew that they were to detonate the bomb.
Right.
But there was some rumors that Japan and Tokyo and Washington somehow sensed that there could be something. So, I mean, we have to put together the intelligence asset we have and what they have in Japan, what they have in America, in order to effectively deal. Otherwise, the government said that we have kill chain, destroying the North Korean missiles in advance if they are really intend to fire first. But this intelligence failure showed us that it was a liar. So I think in South Korea, we're going to have more support for in a secret cooperation with Japan and America, I think.
Now we are hearing about the possibility of Japanese lawmakers visiting the victims of wartime sex slave. I think this has been reported in Japan so far. How feasible is this, and does it show that Japanese lawmakers, as the representative of Japanese people, offering apology, does it carry a big meaning?
It will definitely help.
Okay.
And if they were to come, I want good people come.
Good people.
I mean, those people who would say very different, say different thing again when they go back to Japan.
Right.
I know there are many good lawmakers in Japan
who have maintained consistent position.
Oh, yes.
Not changing their words and depending on different places.
Politicians, diplomatic trips has a lot of symbolic meanings, especially this time. If Japanese lawmakers visit and talk directly to those 46 victims, apologize, I think this will create more positive feelings among South Koreans, and this is one of the good approach. I think.
Professor Nam Ki-jeong, how likely is it? Is it just the Japanese report? Do you think it's going to happen?
Yes. In addition to the symbolic meaning, the visit also has practical importance. To expand the government budget, the executive branch should obtain the approval of the Diet. According to the settlement, Japan will take its responsibility with the budgetary measures of Japanese government. So we can interpret this responsibility as a kind of virtual reparation. The visit of Japanese lawmakers will prove this interpretation is correct.
I see. So we are just being reminded about the additional very important point about that. Now we are getting closer to the end of our discussion here, and I think it's time for us to cover international political dynamics a little bit. Professor Park, Professor Nams, you have all mentioned United States so far, but let's talk about it just briefly. Do we believe Washington now sees the overall Japan-Korea situation done, all managed well? What do they have in mind now? Do they have, Washington I'm talking about, do they have further plans in mind in terms of taking further steps?
As far as I heard from private channels from Washington, they are quite satisfied.
Okay.
Actually, behind the scenes, Washington expressed several times to conclude this kind of knotty historical issues and think about future-oriented solutions, especially our security framework against China.
Right.
So they are quite happy. And I hope probably after the general election this year, April 13th general election.
In Korea?
In Korea. Right. I think the trilateral summit of Japan, United States, South Korea could happen for more aggressive and active approach toward North Korea's nuclear issues, also checking the China's rising in military terms, even though economically we are closely integrated into China. I think this is a very important issue as of now.
Interesting, right.
I think wartime violence against humanity is not only a South Korean issue, it is an issue of whole humanity.
Very true.
And there are many Americans who suffered from Japanese atrocities, like American pilots, airmen who were put into human experiment in Japan. And the many Japanese POWs who suffered a lot in the prisoners' camp. So, and more than that, America really wants to anchor Japan inside the San Francisco treaty system. And the U.S. wants Japan to remain as America's faithful and dependable ally.
Right.
In that regard, this is not a victory for Japan and Korea, but it is also a victory for America. So
Perhaps
that
big
is-
step forward.
Yes. So America really welcomed this a step forward. And if Prime Minister Abe and his followers and the Diet really keep their promise, I think the trilateral cooperation will gradually recover and will reach to a point that America finds it satisfactory.
Right. Very important point. Professor Nam Ki-jeong, what do we do about China?
Okay.
China is a very important player here, and of course they are involved with historical issues here. What do we see in China, and what do we do?
China thinks that it can take advantage if the conflict over this issue becomes the front of history war between Korea and Japan. In addition, China is concerning the effort of U.S. for the settlement was the main driver behind the scene, thinking that U.S. is aiming to enhance Korea-Japan-U.S. cooperation with the agreement. That's why China has been so skeptical about the deal. However, Korea should make efforts to reassure China, showing that it made a kind of solution for a common problem of China and Korea. Moreover, Korean government has to explain China that Korea-China relations with Korea-Japan-U.S. cooperation can play an important role in alleviating the conflicts and clashes in U.S.-China relations and China-Japan relations. This logic will be more persuasive if Korea does its best to maintain and develop stable bilateral relationship with China.
Right.
And I think China, Beijing, must thank President Park that President Park did all those difficult jobs for China. What I'm talking about is that it is also Chinese issue. There were many Chinese comfort women.
Right.
And China suffered actually more than us. Think about 300,000 innocent people who were massacred. Japanese ultra-rightists say that, oh, no, it was not 300, it was only 100. 100,000 is still a huge number of people. Think of their lives, their relatives. So in that regard, we did for China. So I think Beijing should thank President Park rather than saying they were disappointed.
Professor Nam Chang-hee, what you're saying is what we did for China is set up a sort of like a, what do you call it, platform or a template for resolving the differences?
We stopped dangerous element to move around in Japan. We stopped neo-revisionist movement resurfacing in Japan.
Right.
So we did for China.
Right.
China is unhappy in that Japan and South Korea is militarily more and more allied after these issues. They're unhappy about this. And Japan is not going to pay much attention, as they did to us, into the sexual slavery issues of Taiwanese, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. Why? Because they are not directly related to their security interest. Probably it will take longer and longer time when they reach this kind of deals.
Wow, interesting observation. Actually, I was going to ask Professor Nam Ki-jeong about it, dealing with the issues, similar issues in China, Philippines, Taiwan, and Indonesia. Do you agree with Professor Park's observation that with this agreement, Japan is not going to be pressed to deal with other countries? Or what's going to happen?
About these countries, Japanese government argues that legal reparations already finished.
Just like what they
Yes.
said to Korea based on
Yes.
1965, okay.
With the treaties of reparation, Japan paid the reparation to the Philippines and Indonesia for its previous war crime. In addition, in these countries, this issue was already resolved because most of the victims accepted the atonement offered by Asian Women's Fund. Therefore, even if Japan takes some follow-up measures in relation to the Korea-Japan agreement, it would not be that difficult or burdensome for Japanese government. In relation to the Chinese case, Japan declared the end of the war through the respective peace treaty with China and Taiwan. And a legal reparation issue was resolved when China renounced its demand for war reparation from Japan.
I see.
As Korea's legal status is different from that of China or Taiwan, Japan's follow-up measures for them will not be the same at least as last December's settlement.
I see.
However, if Japan really takes those measures, that reveals the significance of Korea-Japan agreement as a global model that motivates those measures.
I see. That's something to keep in mind as we look toward the future. Talking about looking toward the future, we have to close our discussion here, but some final words, Professor Chang-hee, now what Korea should do with this agreement going forward?
Well, because we came to an agreement which was a joint win-win game to Korea and Japan, South Korea and Japan, I think I'd like to build on more. I'd like to suggest that we should further humanitarian global norm with respect to the violence during the wartime, building on this small step forward. I think we can do it. And I think Japan has now chosen to the right way. I think Japan will come our side and the international society's position. So international law gradually evolves. Okay, and so I want make a global norm regulating wartime atrocities. That atrocities are happening even today. Look at Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And Syria.
So take advantage of our experience and go forward into the global community and try to address and help the issues elsewhere with the similar nature. That's a great idea. Professor Park, your final words on what Korea should do ahead.
It's a great regret and great pity that still in this 21st century, human civilization has created a lot of problems, conflict-oriented and adversely turns against one another, and crimes against humanity, which is happening in North Korea, right in front of us. This must be stopped, but it is spreading more because this civilization is material-oriented one, not value-oriented one. This is a question of we have to change the human civilization paradigms to basically cure this kind of defect, and crimes against humanity must be terminated. And this is a pity. And also one more thing I would like to say is that. This kind of a sexual slavery issue is such an important one. More important to us is the how to return those Korean army soldiers who were abducted during the Korean War. This is much more important, reviving our national spirit.
I see.
I'm reminding this issue.
Right. So once again, we are being reminded that the human rights issue is very important for Korea because of its past as well as its future. So. This whole discussion today has been a very tough one because of its sensitivity, and I want to thank our panel members big time for wonderfully handling this very difficult discussion. And we hope our viewers who have joined from all around the world have learned a lot and furthering your understanding about this very challenging issue that has been in the way of furthering relations between Japan and Korea. And in the same regard, we hope that you will come back again to this program Upfront to understand more of the important issues that affects Korea as well as the world, which means next time we want to see you in this program, once again Upfront. Until then, goodbye.